Remember this?
Blue streak speeds by.
Sonic the Hedgehog, the king of gaming in the 90s. Not Mario, not Zelda, not Crash Bandicoot, but Sonic. He was cool, he had an attitude, and he was awesome. With that fame came copycats, and those copycats came in abundance. Today, on a brand new show, we'll be looking at those copycats that came in trying to steal Sonic's thunder. But did they? Well, greetings everybody. I'm going to 25, or Talk 25, and you're watching the Great Northern Phone Podcast presents the Sonic Club.
Sonic, he's got an attitude. Sonic, he's the fastest thing alive. He's the fastest thing alive. He's the fastest thing alive.
Okay, Smokey, roll 'em.
It's showtime.
Most everyone's now.
So, before we get into this, let's explain a few things. First off, what is the Great Northern Phone Podcast? Well, Great Northern Phone Podcast is a podcast I'm releasing bi-weekly as a basic show to show everyone like film, TV, video games, and sometimes miscellaneous. Now, let's get over a few fun facts first off. One, this is a bi-weekly show, so every other week we'll get this. Okay? There will be times though in this bi-weekly structure that I won't be able to post an episode. Either due to work commitments or my schedule being too full for me to get an episode in. It's very much trying to figure out what times are best for an episode. And two, just FYI, I'm not exploring topics as much as you would think, but I know songs well enough that I think I can get into it. If you think you can solve that, I feel free to do so. Heck, there are YouTubers that are way better than I am at this topic, so I can easily show you how good I am, or I can show you how much of a different review I am. Okay? Being said, this is going to be one of the many video game episodes of Sonic clones. But before you ask what's a Sonic clone, let's have a look back into what Sonic himself was. Thankfully, to help with designs, I put up the Sonic the Hedgehog's artwork. Now, I don't know if everyone has this collection, but if you want to look at the concept of Sonic the Hedgehog right now, you can pull it out for the enjoyment. So, let's see. So, originally, Sonic's design went through changes himself. Initially, he was a rabbit called Mr. Rabbit, with his ears coming tax. Okay? That was originally scrapped. There's also a Teddy Roosevelt style character that was also considered as a protagonist. However, this was also scrapped as a protagonist. However, the design would make it reused for Dr. Robotnik/Eggman. So, not wanting to give a good idea to waste, they decided to use a hedgehog design. But they started to scrap one thing. And this thing is a bit odd. Sonic initially had a human girlfriend named Madonna. Yes, I'm serious. Sonic 06's Elise was not an original idea. I think there are three reasons why this was cut. One, there was probably no reason to have Madonna in the first place. It didn't make sense. Two, the implications are just outright creepy. And three, I think might also the reason why Madonna was cut, is because of the actual singer Madonna herself. If this character got leaked out, Madonna would have sued Sega like crazy, as this is blatant copyright infringement on her name. So, while I don't think it's a true theory, it's a very likely theory nonetheless. In the end, Sonic was made of different elements. He was given a cool ad, and his manner was based on Michael Jackson. He was given Bill Clinton's Get Done attitude, and he was given a joke of blue because it matched the Sega logo. The first game released in 1981, and it became a huge staple. At one point, Sonic was even outselling Mario at the time. New characters were added at the same time, like Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and so many more. And soon enough, Sonic became a staple of the franchise. But with that fame came copycats. So let's look at 5 copycats right now. Our first copycat is...
Awesome Kickstarter machine knows what?
I'm awesome.
Awesome Possum. Awesome Possum is a unique one, created by Tengen, and yes, if you do wonder, it is pronounced Tengen, but even honestly it's pronounced Tengen because of how my vernacular works sometimes. But, to make it easier, we'll say Tengen in this episode. Tengen was a subsidiary of Atari, and Awesome Possum was basically their attempt to get into Sonic the Hedgehog. Created by a company and community, Awesome Possum was a bit of an odd character to say the least. He was meant to save the environment, which L. Seaborn had conceived him all the way back in high school when he was still working. And game, Awesome Possum basically helped save the environment in ways. It was released for the Sega Genesis in 1983, and it's easily considered one of the more well-known Sonic clones. Awesome Possum has a very snappy attitude at times, having a bit more a cocky and charismatic side to him. He would often say things like things that we talked about before. There is an option to mute him in the game if you do get annoyed by his voice, which I can see some people getting annoyed by. In terms of the game itself, though, it's nothing too spectacular. It's a basic 2D platformer. Okay? It's just that it features a possum that was used at the time. And it's not only possum character as you see later on. Probably the most interesting about Awesome Possum was actually a lawsuit. As a lawsuit came out in 1997 against him with Paul Bluesky, who claimed that the character in the comic book, Awesome Possum, was copyright infringement. However, this case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. The book itself that Bluesky was publishing never got released afterwards. But what happened to Dr. Possum afterwards? Well, not much, honestly. Not much. He basically got cut along the way. And while yes, Awesome Possum is a character who basically got forgotten about afterwards, he's still remembered as an odd curio in the Sega Genesis library. Okay? If nothing else, the lawsuit serves as a great way to show us how he became a character. And while yes, he is obviously more forgotten about him, he does serve as our first test subject in this case. Whew. Now, I know the one you're all getting to is right around the corner. So, let's not waste any more time with... Bubsy. Probably the most infamous mascot of the cat group. People either love Bubsy or hate him. And there's good reason why. Bubsy is very much depending on how much you can tolerate him. His design does somewhat irk me still. I mean, he's a bunny bobcat, which makes a lot of sense, but still, he has a very odd design. Okay, he's wearing a shirt, a t-shirt with exclamation point on it, but it's still Donald ducking it around, basically. Okay, and yeah, that's the main issue with him, that he basically has this whole idea of him basically doing that. But the reason people find Bubsy to be one of those characters where you either love him or hate him is because of his personality. he's very annoying at times and can act as somewhat of a Jar Jar Binks character in a sense, where a lot of people find his voice very grating at times. But let's go over Bubsy's first step. Bubsy's first game was released as classic character of the first kind, created by Accolade, as Accolade made Bubsy compete with Sonic the Hedgehog in a way. Like Awesome Possum, it was also released on Genesis. However, it was also released on the Nintendo and the Windows. The Windows version only comes out in 1987, but still. As for the game itself, the first game, it actually wasn't terrible. Bubsy himself wasn't terrible, and it was a good battle. To make it a success, a Saturday morning cartoon pilot was made, titled Bubsy and What Could Possibly Go Wrong. It basically was sponsored by Taco Bell, and it made Bubsy somehow very obnoxious. In the first game, he's not really all that annoying, but in this game, episode, oh boy.
We were only having fun, and if that's a crime, then book us.
Hey,
You should all be put in jail.
you see, if you had lost that helmet to the turkey and the rat, you could have easily destroyed
Looks
the
like
world.
voice actor Rob Paulsen voices Bubsy. And while Rob Paulsen's done many great voices before, like Yakko and Pinky, it's very much telling that he was definitely an odd fit for Bubsy, as his voice is very grating on the ear at times.
It's me, the Prince of Personality.
Also, when watching this pilot, Bubsy just comes off as too mean. Like, he comes off as kind of arrogant at the whole thing. And one thing that really does jump out towards you with Bubsy is the whole joke when he says that one of his own uncle friend is terrified of him, and yet Bubsy thinks he's his hero. Like, that's not a sympathetic character. That's a guy who just is kind of a dick for the whole episode. And that kind of does parade through the whole thing. He comes off as too unlikable. There was an art to writing a character who's unlikable, and this pilot does not really make Bubsy feel unlikable. Okay? Now, the pilot itself wasn't picked up, and watching it, it's a pretty solid excuse for a pilot, as it's pretty bad, obviously. And I don't just mean because of the limited animation time, but it's just also the writing and Bubsy's character just don't work. Thankfully, the pilot did not need to be a success to actually prove the game to be a success. And the success of the game, Accolade made their own sequel. However, there was one difference. Michael Berlin decided not to return to the game, wanting to work on some other things. So, Bubsy 2 was worked on with a different team. Instead of having Michael Berlin, Sidney Kirkpatrick was the main designer of Bubsy now. Bubsy didn't really change much. The only main change is that instead of Windows being game this game, the Game Boy got this game instead. And knowing the Game Boy, you can easily see what the game looked like afterwards with this green, pukey mess of screen. Bubsy 2, unfortunately, was a bit different. Unlike the first game, Bubsy was not passion, but instead was a bit different. The player could choose their own stages like if this was Mega Man. However, the reviews, while they weren't as terrible as you would think, they were more mixed towards Bubsy 2. With critics generally giving it more of a 60 to 70% range instead of the 70 to 80% that Bubsy 1 got. The sales also kind of lower, but they weren't too low to prove anything. They decided to go with a third game, not one afterwards, in 1985, with Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales. This one, however, was a bit different. Bubsy, instead of these Fractured Furry Tales, was not released on the Sega Genesis or the Nintendo. Instead, it was released on the Atari Jaguar. If you don't know what Atari Jaguar is, it was Atari's last effort to make a video game console. It sold so poorly that when a CD attachment was attached for it, it basically tanked so badly that it's lucky if you can find one not only in the wild, but that's also working at the same time. Okay? The Atari Jaguar was touted as the first of a 64-bit console. Unfortunately, that did not mean much for Bubsy. Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales was a flop. Critics were more mixed towards it than ever, and it did not sell well beyond entire Jaguar. Still, it was there. It also didn't help that by this time, fans were getting a little tired of Bubsky's whole shtick. It wasn't, but because of how things were going, they had one last game on there in the 90s. Yeah, Bubsy 3D. And if you thought Bubsy was annoying beforehand, well, yeah. Bubsy comes out as even more unlikable than he did in the cartoon. You know, he's more arrogant, more annoying, and more just off, just not fun to watch. He breaks the fourth wall like if he was Deadpool, but he doesn't do it in a good way. Breaking the fourth wall is an art. Characters like Deadpool and the Genie do it masterfully, but there's a reason why it's always a risk to break the fourth wall. It has a double-edged sword effect where sometimes breaking the fourth wall can easily lead to a bad joke. Okay, there I'll see the movies as an example of how not to break the fourth wall. But if you really want to see an example in gaming industry, Bubsy 3D has that in spades. But there are a lot more issues than just Bubsy breaking the fourth wall and failing miserably. Another main issue with the game is the controls. As one of the very first 3D platformers, Bubsy did not control well. He jumps weirdly, having this odd jump into him where his camera would move up. And the camera controls what even are the camera controls? As there's barely anything. The camera does whatever it thinks it wants to do, and it always moves around like it's drunk. Not only that, but Bubsy himself doesn't control good either. The game is too slippery, and it looks awful too. Instead of going with a more textured area, it's going with a polygonal area, as that was more the standard for 3D games at the time, making everything look like a triangle at the time. Bubsy 3D was lambasted by critics and audiences at the time, and while some critics did give it positive outlet for being one of the first games, those same critics later did change their minds and make it bad. The game sold poorly as well, becoming a huge flop on the industry. It seems that Bubsy was gaming empire was gone. That was until 2017 when the Woolly Strike Back. Released for the PlayStation 4 and the Windows, this was a kind of return to form for Bubsy. He was back to being a 2D platformer, and he was back to being, well, Bubsy. However, despite being a return to form in ways, it didn't really get much attention, and it stayed back as one of the more games. It's even mostly a mediocre critical score. While Bubsy himself wasn't doing terrible, it was something that really didn't do well for people. And unfortunately, the game itself didn't really sell as well as others thought it would be. Luckily, it sold well enough to get a sequel, Bubsy Paws on Fire. But this game somehow did it about a bit better review-wise, but sold even worse than the first one, becoming one of the biggest bombs in gaming history. Despite being released for the Switch as well, it just didn't do anything spectacular. And unfortunately, Bubsy was basically retired for a bit. That was until 2025, when Bubsy 4D was announced. Well, yes, we don't know when this game is going to get released. At least aside from 2026 release date, Bubsy 4D is the closest we're getting to a recent Bubsy game. Bubsy himself is not a terrible character. Hell, he's not even a bad character. But Bubsy serves as an idea of what could fail if you... You have to be kind of careful when you become a Sonic clone. Well, Bubsy may be a bit of a inconsistent character. One character who did have a lot of fame was Rocket Knight Adventures. Rocket Knight Adventures was a bit of a game. Originally, instead of being this one was created by Konami instead, and was released in Genesis in 1983. And unlike the other games, Rocket Knight Adventures gained pretty good reviews in its first year. It became one of the best games for Sega Genesis. But why? In points, it was fun to play. It gained real well reviews, and Rocket Knight himself felt good control. The main villain Axel is a great way to gain down a villain. However, and Rocket Knight himself was a great character to look at. It became much more fun afterwards. A sequel was made not afterwards with Sparkster, Rocket Knight Adventures 2. And to help out with that, the second main character of the game, Rocket Knight, was basically released. Genesis, that's me. Now, it also released on the Super Nintendo as well, but it was going out named Sparkster instead. Both versions were technically the same, and while not as well received, Rocket Knight did get some good reviews. And playing a single game, although it's nowhere near as good as the first, it's not a bad game, and it still plays it in the best way possible, as there really isn't a bad thing to say about Rocket Knight or Rocket Knight 2. I guess the worst thing we're going to say about it is that it can be kind of mediocre at times. However, that's not really a bad thing. While Spark Stuffing didn't get as good as the Genesis version, it still got good reviews. However, Rocket Knight will basically disappear for a while. That is until 2010 when a newer game was released for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. Technically, it's just a set for shooting, but like the other games, this game was also received pretty well. Well, it definitely was the lowest received of all three. This game itself became a huge staple of that time, and became down. However, after this game, Rocket Knight was basically retired. Now, as much as I've been praising Rocket Knight, I still admit he is a Sonic clone or the same. And while yes, he did do very well, and of all things, he's probably one of the best reviewed games for the Sega Genesis out there, he is definitely a bit of an oddity creation. But if you think that just Rocket Knight himself is an oddity, you haven't not seen anything yet with Zool. Wait, what's Zool? Well, I'm glad you asked. Zool was the mascot for the very short-lived Amiga CD32. But what's Amiga CD32? In fact, what is the rest of the stuff? Well, we're gonna find that out and more after the break.
Demeter Stokes, president of HAG. It's bad enough that Sega Genesis has the most 16-bit games, but this new Sonic the Hedgehog, oh, he really ducked my doilies. They think he's incredibly fast. Well, what's the hurry, mister? And about his attitude. Smarty pants! Why can't it be more like a nice little Mario? No, get Sonic free when you buy a Sega Genesis system at a team price of $149.99.
And we're back. So, let me ask you, what is Zool anyways? What is Zool? Well, again, Zool was made in the CD32, which was Commodore's last-ditch effort to make at least a console in the 90s. Now, it basically became one of the biggest bombs out there. The ADGN goes into more history of CD32 than I can, but it became one of the biggest console plots ever. And Zool was really the mascot of that system. Zool himself released a game that was made for it. And yes, this game was released on other platforms like the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and the Game Boy. But for now, honestly, it was made basically for the PlayStation 2. Now, there is really nothing special with the game. It's a basic 2D platformer, doing okay at times, but it doesn't really stand out in terms of other 2D platformers at the time. This isn't like Sonic or Rocket Knight. It's just your basic platformer that was released at the same time. Zool, however, luckily didn't sell too poorly considering the system attached to it. And surprisingly enough, it didn't do too awful. Now, one thing though, is that he was basically made a promotion with Chupa Chups, which if you don't know, was basically just the lollipop kind. Yeah. Zool did really be a sequel called Duel 2, released next year. Still released on Nintendo 32. However, unlike the previous one, this was not released on Nintendo 32. Perhaps seeing the writing on the wall, the other companies bailed out. And as such, instead of released on those systems, it was released on the Jaguar instead in 1983. However, like the first game, it's still a basic 2D platform, and it didn't really put this wrong by it. It's not terrible, but it's in the upper echelon of being okay. But Duel has one last piece of it. Initially, 2000, it was a bit of a revival by DDI, or Data Interactive, and it would reboot in the same ways. Unfortunately, that reboot did not go anywhere. Instead, what we got from it was the terrible Ninja Breadman. So, this explains Ninja Breadman's candy coating accessories. And well, yes, it's awful. It doesn't really tie me in. Duo is easily the most forgotten mascot we've got here, as he didn't really set the world on fire in any meaningful way. He was released for a console that didn't have much of a fan base and was in less than a year. And then when the second came out, he released on 2 consoles that were also successful. So Jaguar not so much better than Amiga C32. That being said, he does have his own fan base, I guess, but Zero has remained basically as another forgotten relic of the 90s. But the last one, well, it's kind of an oddity, but this one, I think, was probably the most successful of the mascots that tried to clone Sonic's community. And everybody, may I present to you all with Gex. Gex is a gecko who enjoys simple pleasures like nude funkercise.
My usual morning routine of nude funkercise.
Nude funkercise! I'm just realizing I had to write a plot detail that says nude funkercise. What the hell has my life become? Anyways, Gex is one of those characters that basically became a release for the 3DO. What is a 3DO? It was past stocks tucked into the video game industry at the time. And it didn't sell well, but one thing that did remain constant was Gex himself. Selling pretty well, and he did try his best at it. Soon, he was also, however, because of that success of the 3DO, he was also still sold on the Sega Saturn and PlayStation. Now, Gex originally has an attitude, it's very snappy, and he acts as kind of a hot shot. This depends, it can really also be like my character. However, unlike Bubsy, he doesn't come as annoying, but more just what you expect from a 90s character. Constantly breaking the fourth wall, but in a way that's not too annoying. Common is more charming than anything else. Now, while Gex was there is one thing that he had that was a bit different. Gex had a 3D platform that actually did pretty well. Well, Gex's first came to 2D game that required password to save at the time, and it was pretty archaic for 1995. A sequel was made afterwards in 1998, which was called Gex 2: Enter the Gecko. Now, Gex Enter the Gecko was a bit different. As for the voice of Gex, Dana Gould provided voice in the first game, and inspired the guys in all 3 games. See? Dana is more known for being a writer on some properties, especially in Simpsons, but his voice as Gex is pretty fun, adding that wisecracking nature. However, Gex...
Since retiring from the public's eye, I have resigned myself to a life of solitude. For 2 years, I started my day watching Kung Fu theater. Days, then weeks blurred into one long, greasy telethon. The next thing I know, some government goons show up at my place. It seems they've caught a whiff of old Mr. Sunshine himself. Rez. He's back in the media dimension, and they think I'm crazy enough to go back in after him. So they whisk me away to Interrogation 101.
However, Gex himself, well, instead of having that, he is now basically playing a different thing, where he's played by the paper who did these voice of the sorting hats. Leslie Phillips. Well, okay. It's very unique in a way where he gives the character a suave, debonair British accent.
Retiring from the public eye, I have resigned myself to a life of solitude. For 2 years, I started my day watching supermarkets sweep. Days, then weeks, blurred into one long, sorry afternoon chat show. The next thing I know, some government goons show up at my house. Seems they've caught a whiff of old Mr. Sunshine himself. Raz. He's back in the media dimension, and they think I'm crazy enough to go back in after him. So they whisked me away to Interrogation 101.
Now, Gex himself game was not just his PlayStation. Well, it wasn't really just like a Saturn either. Nintendo 64 got instead. There were also visual differences. Due to the fast power of 64, it's not as strong as the PlayStation version, which is the version you're seeing if you watch it on YouTube. But Gex himself basically has pre-rendered cutscenes in the PlayStation version, when this one is basically just in-game footage. PlayStation footage is their footage. However, there are some, it is aimed more at adults. Now, there is maybe another change it has, and that is the ending. In the original ending, Gex is just finished ending on the PS5 version, and just finished watching the show. While in the PlayStation version, he basically decides to enter the gecko with Catch Pandemonium, which is another safe PlayStation. Yeah, some of the humor did fly over audiences' heads, so to speak. And this scene is one of those, what even is this moments in the game, as it does make you scratch your head a bit more. Still, the game, most of Gex games were received very well, actually. Surprisingly enough, despite getting some mixed review times, they did get very popular. Those versions were always well received, with the controls and the controls being very much received. The camera is the main issue, but these are 3D games from the 90s, so having a bad camera is like trying to chew bubblegum with a bag of nuts. It's gonna go rough either way, and it's not exactly easy to see why. But Gex himself sold well enough to have a third game. Yes, he actually got a third game, Gex 3: Decode Gecko. Wow, so that was something else. Dan Gould playing for the American cut, brought Danny John Drew Osborne came back as the new voice of Gex after Leslie decided not to come back. The protagonist of this one is a bit different. Gex is still a secret agent child as mine was last time, but this time he's a bit more different. Well, the last game was mostly featured on TVs and stuff. Hell, the original collectibles were legit TV remotes. Basically, TV remotes couldn't be stars or jiggies. Instead, they decided to become a bit of a different thing instead. And they decided to use, well, other things too. Gex became a bit of a unique assessment instead, where game is on the subject entirely. Like the last game though, there's a lot of humor that flew over people's heads. There's a lot more game references that make a lot of sense. Now, on the second game, Gex game also received popular reviews. Resident Evil version was still criticized for its slowdown in camera, but the version still was the key game, and so his praise for it. But after this, Gex disappeared. But why? He made a transition to 3D surprisingly well. I was surprised that they didn't make a version for the PlayStation X, PlayStation 2, Xbox, and the Xbox and GameCube. Well, they had plans to get one fourth game in the Gex franchise. However, those plans never amounted to much. Save from a few mentions afterwards, Gex basically had to fade away. But Gex is a fan base. And in 2025, Gex got a remaster with all the trilogy releasing on Nintendo Switch, Xbox Series X, Steam, and PlayStation 5. With upgraded graphics and a more polished exterior. While Gex himself was a staple, he definitely became a sensation with his fans, and I still remember it as a great sensation for those who do love him. And while Gex himself never really could contain that same, goal, he had all those very much sides that made him a popular character in the video game market. So, how do these Sonic clones compare? Do all Sonic clones do well? Well, it depends on what you mean by did well. In terms of sales, they all didn't sell poorly. Aside from Zuo, none of them are really huge flops. And yes, Zuo did do the whole Amiga 2 thing where it didn't sell well regardless. He still has a memorable idea. And yes, while characters like Zuo and also Possum did fade in popularity, others like Bugsy and Gex all remembered. So, naturally, this didn't mean anything that badly for some. But, then again, these were all made just because of one thing: making money. These were all made in the same vein of Sonic himself, of making the same amount of cash, making some sort of moolah to get down. And yes, Gex himself may have been successful, but he still faded into obscurity afterwards. All these characters have faded into obscurity in some way. And, well, yes, Bugsy himself has a fourth game coming up pretty soon. Yeah, we're not sure exactly when that game's coming out, and we're not even sure if it's good or not, as previous games have proven that Bugsy still is a bit of a questionable character in a sense. And while yes, it is a bit of an oddity seeing how these characters go well, I would say that not everybody has had success for it. But the reason why these characters didn't catch on as well as Sonic is because Sonic was the one with a strategy house. The character himself was a unique character at times, being someone who was not conventional hero, being snappy and quick-witted, and having a cool guy attitude that really did change his personality up. And while Sonic wasn't a perfect character, and didn't transition to 3D as well as others, he did have the same idea down of, hey, let's try again. And yes, Sonic did do amazingly, he still did try. And we saw that very well with the game themselves. Well, Sonic always had a successful run afterwards, and is still remembered very fondly to stay by fans, and by non-fans alike. I mean, he made 3 movies with a 4th one on the way. How can you say that about other characters? And yes, while these characters did, I will say that these characters outright tanked. They did end up better than some other ones that did try to cash in on Sonic's success. And I will say this: these 5 did try to basically get down what happened with Sonic. Now, generally, none of these characters did poorly. And I don't want to insinuate that I don't hate these characters at all. Even Bugsy, who I mentioned in I personally don't have anything against him. So, what do I think these Sonic characters will end up? Well, I think that all these Sonic characters did fairly well for themselves. And yes, none of them were huge staples, but I want to reiterate this to you. I don't think these characters are bad regardless. And I think that all these characters deserve at least something to leave an odd spot in the video game industry. Well, that's all for this episode of the Great Northern Film Podcast. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.